Welcome back to Tony and Tina's Wedding, Creating a Theater Tribe. I'm Larry.
I'm Gret.
And I'm Concetta.
In this episode, we're talking to two folks who were vital to the growth of Tony and Tina's wedding.
In part one of the episode, we chat with Randall Thropp, who was the original set designer for the show.
And then in part two, we catch up with David Rothenberg, TNT's very first press agent.
These two were both instrumental in the early days of the show, as well as paving the way for the longevity it was able to have.
So, grab yourself a piece of wedding cake.
And get ready for some really incredible theater stories.
Because episode 10 starts now. Hello there, Randall Thropp. How are you today?
I am very fine, thank you.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. So let's get started and talk to you a little bit about the history of Tony and Tina's wedding and your involvement in that.
Oh, yes.
Randall, I don't remember for sure, but you were at Carmelita's. Is that correct?
I mean, we have to backtrack a little bit because it all started with the cake. I had known Mark Campbell. We worked together in children's theater in Bronxville, New York. And I think it was a Thanksgiving dinner. And you all were doing the show at the Legion Hall, or it was like a weekend thing. Well, then he came to me. He said, "You were tired of buying a cake every time at Carmelita's. Could we do some sort of a fake cake?" Because I'd made props for children's theater and stuff. And I said, "Sure, I can try to do that." So at that time, I was working in Soho, of course, right around the corner is Little Italy. So I went to Little Italy, did some research. There was a bakery. A little old lady was fabulous, loved her. And she had these exotic, and I do mean exotic, cakes in the window. And I went in and I just said, "Oh, I'm really curious. Are those cakes real?" I mean, I knew they were fake. "Are those cakes real?" And she was like, "Oh, no, I make those. Those are just represent what we can do here." And I said, "Well, what's the secret? How do you make this?" Well, she told me what the recipe was, how to make them. So what do? There used to be a store, a lower Broadway called Broadway Panhandler, and they sold all the Wilton stuff. So I bought styrofoam, I bought columns, I bought cherubs, I bought a gazebo, I bought swans. I mean, the whole nine yards. I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and so I made the cake. Mark and I think maybe Joe Corcoran or Mark Nasser, they had that station wagon and they drove out to Brooklyn and they picked up the cake, which was ginormous. So that's how it kind of started. Well, then I guess through Nancy, Mark, they asked me if I would be interested in creating a new space, but I needed to see Carmelitas. So I went to Carmelitas, which was an experience. I went to Carmelitas and just sort of took it all in it was very cramped, very crowded, very crowded. And the flow was not really conducive because I'd done sets for other people, mostly for the kid shows. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. So I was really fascinated. I mean, it's like really believable. I mean, here we are in this cramped space. And I remember meeting Carmelita was the background. It was just so tight. It was so tight. But I'll tell you what I fixated on was just the accuracy of everything that was unfolding in front of me. And it was especially Joanna Coca as Loretta Black was so focused. And I mean, I was sitting at the table kind of to the side of where the food was being served. And I just kept watching her going, "Is she real? Is this, maybe she's part of Carmelita's staff," because she was just so focused. And then I'm like, okay, this is really interesting. So blah, blah, blah. So then cut to the chase. We all met at Nancy's apartment with the core group and then talked about my ideas, like what we could do. And it was funny because I was living in Brooklyn at the time. And of course, you go to an Italian restaurant and I was taking all of that in, not necessarily a wedding hall, because the wedding halls are the places I had been to. I had been to a couple in New Jersey for another event for the company I was working for. And they were really nice. They were bougie. They looked like a Southern plantation. It's like, no, this does not work. No. But I remembered years ago, I had gone to dinner at Mama Leone's. You kids are too young. You're way too young.
I remember Mama Leone.
Oh my God. Mama Leone's was so over the top. It was so fabulous. And there were statues and there were gardens and lattice work and it was dripping in Chianti bottles with, I mean, it was so old school. It was fabulous. And it's like, okay, that's what Vinnie Black would have expanded to. Vinnie Black's Colosseum had to reflect something like that. Very New York, very Italian, blah, 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 blah. And he's a huckster. Okay. He's a total schmooze, a total huckster. So that's what I went in and I presented to everybody at the core group, and everybody bit. They're like, okay, come down and look at this space. And so we looked at the space, which was above Gus's place down in the village. This is so long. This is a long time ago, kids, a long time ago. But anyway, the bar was like a Cheers bar, like from the show Cheers. It was in the center. And we said, no, that's got to go because we need a dance floor. We need room for a dais. We need room for a dance floor. There was a side part. We said, let's just put the bar over to the side. And the budget was not huge, let's be honest. The budget was not huge. So most of my shopping I did on Canal Street, and those stores are long gone. And that was the fun part, was kind of piecing together. It's like, okay, well, the stick-on tiles. And I had a couple of actor friends who volunteered to help paint the place. And I said, it's got to look like red flocked wallpaper. So we couldn't afford red flocked wallpaper. So everything was painted red. And then we did this rag roll texture. So it was the illusion, with the drapes and blah, blah, blah. It was so much fun piecing that all together. But then in the lobby downstairs, because Vinnie Black, he was such a fraud in a way, and just his delusions of grandeur. And so I went to Flea Market on 23rd Street, and also there were two sources. Movie Star News, which used to be down in the village. And that's where I got the celebrity photos. And they were all like Borscht Belt comedians, right? Because I figured that's who he would aspire to. So we framed those, and those were all the way up. That was the whole entrance downstairs. So it looked like a wall of fame. But the thing is, I believe I did, or somebody, may have been Susan and Jay, I may have had. So all the handwriting kind of looked the same, as if Vinnie Black had signed all of their names to these photos. That was, but again, this is the kind of texture that made the original Tony and Tina's wedding an event, because it had to be three-dimensional. It had to have layers. Whether or not you called out the audience and said, oh, look at those signatures, those aren't real. No. It was all about what you discovered in your experience at Tony and Tina's wedding. And I do remember, Larry, you might remember, who was the comedian? It was a Borscht Belt comedian who came to the show, and his picture was on the wall. And he was like, that's not my signature.
Pat Cooper. I think it was Pat Cooper, yeah.
That's not my signature. This is exactly what I wanted you to do, because Vinnie Black signed all of these himself, But also the bathrooms were themed. Remember that? And so the first theme for the men's room was sports. It was all like Yankees, Dodgers, baseball, memorabilia. It wasn't real. A lot of it was copies and stuff, pennants. The ladies' room was very 50s, sort of pink with, I remember there were poodles. I mean, I found all this. At that time, it was so cheap. It wasn't the trendy thing, that mid-century modern stuff. Well, then one by one, people were ripping things off. They were stealing as souvenirs. It's like, oh my God. And that's how I ended up being in the show, playing Vlasik, Vinnie Black's whipping boy, because we decided somebody needs to be working the room, because people were taking gifts off of the piano. People were taking things out of the restrooms. I think I redecorated each of those restrooms 5 or 6 times, because people were just pulling stuff off the walls. I think the final incarnation of the men's room was an Elvis tribute. I found black velvet Elvises on 14th Street. So, Vlasik was created to work the room, to keep an eye open for people. And I was a hybrid of Russian, Polish. I never knew what that accent really was. But thanks to James Altuner, who did speak Russian, was throwing me words, But it was so much fun because Vlasik didn't always have to speak English. So if a customer asks a question, it's like, I don't know. I'm sorry. And I would get somebody like Judy Sheehan, who was playing Nikki, or Carolyn Scott, who was Aunt Teresa, or Joanna. Thank God Joanna was back there playing Loretta Black. And she would direct people to the bathroom. But Vlasik had he could speak English, but he didn't always want to speak English, which was sort of fun to be an observer of that. But switching gears slightly, because I was playing Vlasik, and then I forget who we replaced. I became the photographer for about 3 or 4 weeks, and I loaded the camera with film. So I am the only one, I believe, that actually has photographs from the original production inside the church, inside Vinnie Black's Colosseum, because I put film in the camera. So I have an entire scrapbook of the original Tony and Tina's wedding from when we were at the church in Washington Square and at Vinnie Black's Colosseum.
So I think you probably replaced Vinnie Floriani, who went on Father Mark.
Who was brilliant. Vinnie Floriani. Oh my God. Because he had a major scene that played near the bathrooms, which is where the kitchen area was, where the Black family was back there. And Vinnie Floriani, to this day, I can still see him crying and slumped on the floor or in the bathroom by the toilet, trying to be helped up. And it's just so damn brilliant.
Well, he used
And
to
it was
pass
just,
out in there,
oh yeah. Oh, yeah, it depends. Sometimes he would,
but
but
we
that
had to
was,
stop that. Yeah, we
well,
stopped it
that's,
because
yeah. But
women
that was
were
the,
unzipping his zipper and doing all
oh,
kinds
right.
of
Right. And meanwhile, they're putting a poodle in their purse at the same time.
Yeah, at the same time, it was like, oh Lord, Lord help us all. And that was what always amazed me about that original company was the absolute commitment and focus of those characters. Every one of those characters were totally believable. I mean, with Elizabeth Herring played Sister Albert Maria, and that set the tone for the show at the church because is she a real nun? I mean, it was so spot on, but without being over the top. She was just exuberant. She was a very happy nun and happy to be there.
Yes.
And as the show goes on and the story goes on, of course, it starts to get, it's like, oh, she's just put upon and poor thing, she's made fun of, whatever. But it was her energy that really set the tone with the audience at that church. Again, but everybody set the tone. Everybody.
And
We're so
especially
committed.
Vinnie Floriani doing the ceremony. It was real.
It was real. It
Yes.
was real. And I
Yeah.
just remember having so much fun because it was one of the best times of my career was doing the show, but also it was creating that world. And I remember Nancy and I talking about creating those banners in the church that were like cut out of felt and stitched together, which were all like the youth group,
Yeah.
because it had to be believable, but it looked like they had, on a Sunday after Sunday school, had cut out felt and paper and glued things onto these banners, which were terrific. But again, it's all about that set, that environment had to be 100% believable.
And the church really lent itself to that because you could put whatever you put in there was like a painting to that church. There was not a lot in that church. There were no statues.
No.
Not
No,
like
it was not. It was very Methodist. It was not very Catholic at all. And if we'd had the budget, I would have bought statues. Speaking of statues, of course, my favorite centerpiece of Vinnie Black's Colosseum was the Peeing Boy fountain. And that was the one fountain I could afford. And I think we found that, bless his heart, Joey Fisher was an actor friend of mine, and he actually had a car. And we drove out to Brooklyn, some way the hell out in Brooklyn. And we found a statuary place and they had a Peeing Boy fountain. And it's like, again, this harks back to my Mama Leone's reference, that's the kind of thing. There was a lot of statuary in Mama Leone's. But if we could have afforded it, I would have loved to have. But no, we did some trompe l'oeil and we painted some faint columns and birds, doves flying. It was.
But behind the dais table, those clouds and it was just so fantastic.
But it all looked real. Oh, and then how was it? We decided we had to put plastic. Well, we couldn't afford to have a linen service do tablecloths every performance. I mean, we're doing 8 shows a week. And so again, back to Canal Street, to Canal Plastics, and got yards and yards and yards of clear plastic that we put over the tables. And then I bought yards of cheap fringe. And I remember, again, I think it was Sue Varon, who was so committed to helping me out. I just adore Susan. And we stapled fringe to all the tables. And then we found, oh gosh, there was a restaurant supply place, again, downtown, probably on Canal Street. And that's where I got all the table numbers. And people were stealing those. I had to keep a stockpile. This is before I had a computer. So you were doing them. You were going to the Xerox store. You were copying them and then handwriting table 2, table 4.
And underneath the clear tablecloths, you had a red or some color tablecloth and then like gold doilies.
Doilies, yes. The one was a touch of class. It was a touch of class.
And then the plastic.
And then the plastic. So again, think back to grandma, and everything's covered in plastic. So again, it's all those little touches. And that's what I was so proud of, the little touches that made Tony and Tina's wedding so authentic and believable. The other thing too that was amazing about the show is, depending on where you sat, you slightly got a different show. If you were back by the grand piano where all the wedding gifts were stacked up, and you were near the kitchen, you got an entirely different show back there. In LA, you didn't get it as much. It was hard to do that because it was
But
so
that room was very focused. There were
yes.
my favorite room. So I love
Yeah.
low ceilings and that kind of almost a pressure cooker of Italian
Well,
angst.
yes, it was more intimate because everybody's very close together in the tables. But oh my God, well, Carolyn Scott, brilliant actress, brilliant.
Yeah.
But Carolyn and I had such a rapport, and again with Joanna as Loretta, but it was Vinnie Black, and he was so abusive to me, which I loved. It's like just because Vlasik, move, Vlasik, move, Vlasik, come on, bring the cake out. Where's the cake? He was always barking. But my favorite thing to this day, my favorite thing, he went downstairs to Gus's place, the kitchen. He brought up a fish head and he put a cigarette in the fish head on a tray and walked around the audience going, smoked salmon, smoked salmon. This day. But that's how Kevin's brain worked, you know. And we just had so much fun. It was so hard to keep a straight face with some of the things that came out of his mouth. And he had his pat things that he would say, but then it was the improvised stuff that just lent itself to, you know.
And you had Gary. God. You had Gary Schneider.
Oh, Gary Schneider. Yes. Yes.
Absolutely terrific.
Yes. And Gary Schneider, John Gofredo, and of course, Jay Sheehan. But it was one big family. And that's what I appreciated, I think, the most is about everybody working together and just, it was terrific, you know. Yeah. But creating that world for people to play in.
And then, of course, we did the telethon there.
The telethon. I only have a handful of pictures from the telethon. Oh my gosh, that was so much fun. I mean, Nancy and I still talk about that, but that original telethon was so great with people coming in and out. We were on all night long, but my favorite sketch was the oleosis. Oleosis, which was addiction to butter. And we were trying to raise money in that 1 hour for the Oleosis Foundation because Nancy's character, Tony Ennui, was addicted to butter. And then wasn't Kelly Ebsery in that? And she had a meltdown on the dais and she started eating a butter sculpture, like a real, like sticks of butter.
Kelly Ebsery played Aunt Rose, and she was this very stylish person, but when she went crazy, she went crazy.
She went crazy. And my sketch, I did Julia Child. I think that was Dan Marr and I. And Juan did such a great job of getting me the right outfit. And I looked, you know, I was like making chicken Adidas, where I never thought you could cook a chicken in a tennis shoe, but it's quite easy and quite good. And you know, yeah, it was chicken Adidas, which was chicken shoved into a shoe and put in the oven, you know. And then Denise Moses, the brilliant Denise Moses, who's actually doing a new one-woman show here in LA.
That. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait. The Denise who played Grandma. I think also Denise and I did a sketch about she wanted to raise money for jeans for the prison rodeo. And Nasser and myself and Kevin were in that sketch. But yeah, each hour was dedicated to a different cause. Yeah. And that was a lot of fun. It was a lot.
And then Randall, of course, we went to LA.
Yeah.
That room was harder. It was a fantastic room, but it must have been much harder to decorate.
Well, it wasn't harder to decorate. It was trying to map out the flow of the show. Like, okay, luckily there was already a bar in that room at the very end.
Yeah.
But it was a very grand room, and there was no place for kitchen shenanigans like we used to do in New York, because the kitchen was a real working kitchen that was through swinging doors off to the side. No, I mean, I loved the dais. That was the dear late Darren Goodall rounded up so many great pieces for me. And we got the curtain, you know, what do you call it? A Roman shade or whatever. Behind the dais was like a puckered curtain. It was fantastic. So a lot of things I did like about that space. I liked the fact that we did the ceremony in what had used to be the swimming pool that had been covered over, that was just adjacent to the double doors. And so we could do the ceremony and then walk right into the reception. So it was a different kind of decoration. It was fun. But remember when we had the Santa Ana winds and we had rain, which they do get out here, and we had to go upstairs. There was a whole other space that we had to decorate upstairs.
that was a big space upstairs.
It was huge. Yeah. And it's
was
still, I
huge.
mean, I see it every now and then on television shows. They use that a lot still for
Wow.
locations.
So I haven't heard that mentioned before. So in LA, if there was bad weather, you had to move
Yeah.
where the show was?
We had to move the outdoor because it was
Oh.
tented and it was outdoors. And out here, they have things called Santa Ana winds, which are like 60 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And so it was too risky to have the ceremony outside with the
I
tent.
see.
And because
Yes.
people had to park in the back and you walked down a ramp and then suddenly you were there and there was Elizabeth Herring as Sister Albert Maria greeting everybody and getting people seated and all of that. No, it had to move upstairs. There was another room. That was the old Elks Hall. It's huge.
God,
It's now
it was
called the Park
such a
Plaza.
fantastic-
It was
Wow.
the Elks.
I think that the real reason why we had to do it upstairs, though, was because Joanna Cook's bouquets that she carried up to the front would have flown away.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had
Remember
those big
those?
baskets, those great big
They were
funereal
so
baskets.
huge.
Yeah. But that was
And-
part of the joke, was her struggling to get those.
Oh,
Very-
God.
But yeah, the tone was different and we could accommodate more people. And of course, a lot of celebrities came, which was fun. Remember Cloris Leachman? She wouldn't leave. I mean,
Oh,
she
yeah.
kept coming back.
Yeah, she was great. Okay, the chef.
Oh, well, okay. So Larry and I were flown out to check out the space with the producer who was Douglas Urbanski. Well, Doug Urbanski took us around. We saw the space, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, well, we're going to have dinner with Orietta, who's going to be the chef. Orietta. And so we went to this huge, lovely apartment. Orietta Westfall, I believe was her last name. And so Orietta was very Italian. Her husband was very German, and their son was Manfred. I loved Orietta.
I mean, when
Yep.
Mrs. Vitale came in with the gold earrings, Orietta already had them on. I mean, she wore them in real life.
Yeah, she was the real deal. There was no acting there. She was the real deal. And so she had a prep room that there were double doors that once you left the ceremony, you went through these double doors and that was where you were, your seat assignment and all of that. And Orietta had like a station in there where she was doing the hors d'oeuvres, you know, the pass around hors d'oeuvres that we had. And yeah, that was, but oh, what a character. It was a good show. And it was a good space, but it was very different from New
Yeah.
York. And I liked the intimacy of the New York company better, just where we were, the location. But there's something different. You know, let's face it, in LA in 1989, 1990, if you wanted to go out after the show, good luck. You can find
Right.
maybe a Denny's. Remember that? Everything shut down at 9 o'clock. And in New York, we were also used to, the show went down at 11:15 or 11, and then we would go downstairs to Gus's and have a real, you know, dinner until 1 o'clock and 1:30 in the morning. Or we would go somewhere else, and you just got used to that, you know? And in LA, you could not do that. You really
Yeah.
couldn't. It was,
Well, we also did the Lowy Awards.
yes. Well, Lowy Awards, that stands for the LA Weekly, which was kind of like their equivalent of the Village Voice LA Weekly. And they did theater awards. And one found for me, oh God, this was at the time in LA, I think at the Amundsen or at the Taper, they were playing Agnes of God. And so I was dressed as a nun to come out to represent Agnes of God with a stigmata. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
And I'll never forget, took off the habit, and inside it said Peggy Woods. And I'm like, holy, where did you get this? 20th Century Fox. It was the Mother Superior from The Sound of Music.
I
It
remember.
was her habit. Must have been a large girl. You know.
But
True.
those awards were something.
And of course, any chance for us to have fun and be silly and do characters, it's like, oh, sure, we'll do it. Sure. And that's Mark Campbell was streaking across the stage.
Yes,
that?
that's- yes. Campbell. But it was,
Yeah.
you know, by that time we had done the show for a year and a half, at least 2 years.
Yeah.
And I think that any time to do something different, you know, was
Right.
also really appreciated. But oh my
Yeah.
God, it was so much fun.
No, it was fun. Now, also, you don't forget, the telethon was to raise money for Equity Fights AIDS, and it was the Easter bonnet competition, and it was the very first one. And they looked down on us because technically we were not Broadway. We were off Broadway, okay?
Yes.
And so Nancy said, well, you know, if we're going to be in this, what do we do? And I said, you have to create a hat. So here we go back to the cake. I created a giant wedding cake hat.
Amazing.
Wow.
And also, Juan had them dressed in their bridesmaids' dresses, and there was supposed to be copy that went with that. And I think, Nancy, you guys had written something, and I said, no, that's not right. I'll tell you what's right. You have to say that those dresses are made out of 100% polytard, stain resistant, flame resistant, which makes no sense. Why would you have a flame resistant wedding dress? It was genuine polytard. But yeah, so, and we won, or we raised the most money that year because of the talent.
Something like that. Yeah, because we really went after it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just remember people were like, oh, well, you're off Broadway. You know, it's like, yeah, well, ha, 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 you know. And also remember we got that award from Betty Comden. I mean, it was a great time. I mean, we had a lot of fun.
Well, I think
A lot of fun.
it was David Rothenberg, and he was fantastic. I think that he wanted to get us involved in that because Tony and Tina's Wedding was a little bit different as an off-Broadway show because it gained so much publicity.
Oh, yeah.
So it really had that. Thank you, Randall, so much for taking time from your
Well,
drive.
thanks for doing this document. I mean, this is really fantastic, you know, to have a record with people's stories and their experiences. But like I said, my hat's off to everybody in that original cast was just so incredible to work with. And everybody brought their own energy and own stories and everybody kind of worked in their own little backstories. So, because you're having to have conversations with real people, you've got to be able to back it up somehow. And that's the joy of when I played Vlasik was, no, he did not have to speak English. No. You know, and I could just walk away and just, you know, or struggle with it, you know. So.
Right.
It was great times. It was great times.
It was.
Thank you for everything. Thank you for your peeing boy fountain. David,
Larry,
a long time ago,
long time ago,
you came and you saw a show,
I came, I saw, I conquered.
Vicky's Valentine thing, and you were our press agent at the
Yes,
ballroom.
yes.
So I don't know that you all know this place because I think it might have closed before they were going to clubs, but there was a real top-rate club, 28th Street, and Nancy and I had been doing a show called A Very Vicky Christmas at a real little fantastic little workshop place on Houston and Broadway. So we're doing it, and somehow, did you get down there to see it, David?
No, I became involved with you all because one, you didn't have anyone. You couldn't afford anyone. And I was representing everything that came into the ballroom, and Greg Dawson
Right.
said to me, you ought to meet these guys that you might be compatible with them.
Right. So
Because
Scott
you're all
Gleason,
nuts.
yeah, Scott Gleason brought us over.
Right, Scott Gleason.
But anyway, without you, what would I be? Nothing. I'd still be in Europe working.
Keep going.
But what did you see in us that made us? I know that it was just a job, it was money.
No, young, bright, fresh, and not like anything else that was happening.
Yeah.
And so that was fun. It was really fun. And then I saw at that awful place on 3rd Avenue and 14th Street. That's when you did with Tony and Tina. It was so tacky and so wonderfully tacky.
Yeah. And then you became the press agent for that.
I became the press agent. It was very interesting because there was another show opening when we were opening that was at the Armory, and it came in from California and had tremendous press. The meals they had were gourmet food, and we tiptoed into town, and it lasted about 3 minutes. And Stephen Holden went berserk over Tony and Tina.
There was a third show that Kevin Bacon was in. But the only thing that ever really had teeth in New York was Tony and Tina's Wedding.
Well, first of all, it was honest. Second, it was hilariously funny, and everybody had been to a wedding like that in New York. And it was a press agent's dream, for me at least, because there was so much there, unlike Oakland.
There was a lot there.
And I think my biggest PR triumph was going to the food editor of the New York Times and suggesting that they do a story on a show which feeds the audience 7 times a week or how many times. And it was the front page of the Wednesday food section. And Joe Corcoran tells me that that was the biggest day of box office ever because it got off the arts and leisure pages and it found an audience that didn't know about theater. And I think that was Tony and Tina's great box office draw, was that Off-Broadway has a traditional Off-Broadway audience. And the shows last for 5 minutes because that audience is small. And we went way beyond that. Also, Mark and Nancy were so agreeable. I had them running around to everything. I remember once in the park and no one showed up. And Mark said to me, "This is your Bay of Pigs." But they were spirited and wonderful. Everybody was. I mean, I had a wonderful time. And of course, I often came in as a patron and would act as if I'm one of the guests. And so I interacted with the cast often. It was joyous. It was joyous.
Yeah. Those were some very special days because you saw it. Maybe not in all of the, because we had a couple runs before we went to the ballroom, which I didn't even see, but the Carmelitas, I don't know if you saw that one, the one that's
the one that's on 14th Street.
The one that Steven saw.
Yeah, tacky place.
Yeah. And
I think
so
you needed to you had to get shots before you went there. The other thing that I recall from the press perspective is that every 2 minutes a new Tony was coming in after Mark left, and each one was a media delight. And we had Tony Miola, the Olympic soccer goalie, and Ron Eldrod, who lasted 4 minutes but went on to have a nice movie career. He left at intermission.
Ron was there for maybe 4 weeks. You're right, 4 or 8, 6 weeks.
But the biggest PR thing was when Lee Mazzilli, the former Met player, came. And I remember when we were at the church on Christopher Street going to Gus's, we had not only ESPN, but channels 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, and 11. It was mayhem. And I remember there were 2 homeless men sitting in the little park on Sheridan Square. And some tourists said, "What's going on?" And one of them said, "Dems, Tony, and Tina."
It's fabulous.
Oh, God. I mean, you really were there right at the beginning. Did you think right away, David, that it had a chance to last for a while?
I don't think in those terms. You got what you got and you hope. Off-Broadway shows weren't running. Well, yeah, no, that's not true. Fantastics and Three Penny Opera, but they were traditional.
Right.
Tony and Tina rewrote the book. And I think that was part of it. But weddings, I think Nancy hit it on the nose. Everybody's been to a wedding, and most of us hated going to them. I mean, you go to weddings with a great sense of obligation. At least men do. Women seem to like weddings. All right, ladies, is that a broad, unfair statement? I mean,
Well,
women
it's a
get
broad statement, but I'm not sure it's unfair.
Well,
Yeah,
well, it's
agreed.
like the theater. Women go to the theater and men are dragged.
Unless they're gay men, David.
Yes, well,
But I don't know any gay men, so
well, they don't exist in New York. You have to go to Indiana to find them. And I retired in 2000, but Tony and Tina was still running.
That's right.
Yeah, but when did it open? 89?
It opened in 88.
88. So I stayed with it for the first 12 years.
Wow.
Amazing.
And then I retired.
And then David
Gersten.
He took over. That's
Yes,
right.
He was my assistant and he became the press agent in 2000. I was at the end of my career and I didn't think I'd be working on something like this, and it made me feel great. I had that and Blue Man at the same time, so I was sort of the star of Off-Broadway for 5 minutes.
I often wonder if it could come back because it plays.
Well, I asked that for Joe at dinner. I said, I think it could come back. There's nothing about it that is in that period of time. It's timeless.
It is.
It could play anytime, any place. I remember the most fun is bringing people in and them not knowing it wasn't a real wedding. That happened a lot.
That always amazed me after all these years and so many people knowing what it is, or at least hearing of it, that they can still be people out there who exist who have never heard of it and think that they're genuinely attending a really
Concetta,
real
never
thing.
underestimate the ignorance of the American people.
I guess not. I guess not.
David. But David, I mean, your plan had to have changed and become a different kind of plan when you really understood what Tony and Tina was, because you didn't go after the regular critics for us. You went after
Well,
so many interesting people. And
always thought that the best thing that you can do in the theater is get off the entertainment page. The entertainment people, the arts and leisure pages, which have practically vanished, but that in those days, they were assigned and they covered. And if it was good, they would cover it. And the audience that read the arts and leisure pages would respond accordingly. And I think that my challenge always was to find the audience that, I would use my relatives who would call me. There's an anniversary coming up or a birthday, and they'd go to the theater, or they want to go to the theater. What should they see? These are 2 or 3 times a year people. They're not like us who go for, there was a period in my life when a show couldn't open without my having seen it.
yeah,
Not my relatives in New Jersey, God help them. And I thought that for the people who only go to the theater occasionally, as well as tourists who flood the city, that same with Blue Man, that these are the kinds of things that people who don't go to the theater a lot but want to go on an occasion, that it would be, they were thrilled by it because it was something that they didn't have back in Terre Haute
Right.
or Casper, Wyoming, when they came in. And these are people that don't necessarily read the arts and leisure pages every day, but they do read food pages and obituaries and all sorts of sections, the style section, and you find things about the show that, well, like getting on the food page for them. For Tony and Tina, you found an audience that was different. Style pages too. Mark and Nancy were so cooperative, and we went to a lot of things that were just people having benefits or fundraisers, and they could say Tony and Tina are here, and everybody would ooh and ah because they had heard of Tony and Tina, and so that their visibility was wider than traditional theater. With Blue Man, I remember taking, if you don't mind my talking about,
please.
is that the mayor at the time, I think it was Bloomberg, celebrating the theater, and all the stars were going. And I said to the 3 blue men, go in blue, not as yourselves. And they said, oh, no, it's city. And I said, trust me. And of course, everybody wanted to be photographed with them because the photographers went crazy taking pictures of the Blue Man, but was them with Patti LuPone or Mandy Patinkin.
So you're really good at creating like a spectacle.
I was good.
Yeah. So what was your favorite spectacle that you created, or a promotional event that you created?
In my whole life?
Sure. And then specifically,
You mean with Tony and Tina or with any show? I think probably I got the most attention ever was when I was working. Richard Burton was coming to Broadway in Hamlet in the midst of his. Do you know who Richard Burton is, you young
Oh,
ones?
yes.
Yes,
And
I
he
do.
was
Yeah.
having an affair with an actress named Elizabeth Taylor. And of course, the publicity was everywhere. And we were to open in April of 64, but we were in rehearsal in December of 63. And I called Tom Berteau of Life magazine. And I said, in April of 64 will be the month celebrating Shakespeare's 400th birthday. I would think that the perfect cover for Life at that time would be a picture of Richard Burton as Hamlet. And he said, you got it. Wow. And they sent a photographer up to Toronto, and I sat with Richard till 4 a.m. while they were clicking pictures. And I knew that for Richard, that was very important because he had been an accomplished and well-received actor, but he suddenly became an international phenomenon because of his relationship with Elizabeth. And being on the cover of Life magazine in those days meant you were on every newsstand in America, Canada, and England. And there he was, not as Elizabeth's paramour, but as Hamlet. And so I was very proud of that.
And that must have made him happy.
Well, you didn't know with Richard. Elizabeth was happy, but Richard wasn't. I didn't know. She was much easier to deal with than Richard. He wasn't difficult. He was this. It was a very overwhelming time for everybody because the crowds were, If you watch Taylor Swift and Kelsey, when I watch them now, I say, oh my God, it's Richard and Elizabeth with You Can't Go Anywhere with the Mobs. But the single most important thing that I did theatrically was producing the play Fortune in Men's Eyes, which led to the start of a nonprofit organization that I began literally on the stage of a theater. Fortune in Men's Eyes was written by a formerly incarcerated man. It was about his teenage experience going into jail, where he was literally, and this is his story, he was gang raped on his first night in prison. And the play is about a kid being destroyed by the system. And that we had dialogues on this after play talks, and I started meeting men who had been in prison, and with them started an organization. I left the theater, for many years, and I was the director of the organization. And today has a staff of 500 people, and we have 6 residents in New York. And I'm very proud of it. And along the way, at one of our residents, which we call the Castle, I interviewed 4 of the residents and wrote a play with them and directed it, and ran off Broadway for a year. And we continue to play in prisons. Come to New York. We're going to be doing it on Rikers Island in February. You can come to jail. We'll leave you there. But at the Castle, the Fortune Academy, which exists, every Thursday night there's a community meeting with staff and the residents about their life. And I go every Thursday, and I have for the 25 years. And the play came out of that because I would take guys and women from Fortune to the theater. And one of the guys, said, I want to see everything. And I said, our Thursday night meetings are more dramatic than some of the plays we're seeing. And he said, it was like a Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland movie. Well, why don't we do a play? And I said, yes, let's start talking to people whose lives are, who are clearly committed to a new life. We didn't want somebody flirting with going back to jail. And people who are very different. And we're now, about 10 different people have done it because it's been 15 years since we started. 2 of the original cast are still in it. But I have great pride in that. And they become my friends, and they love the theater, and they become theater people.
Oh, wow.
And I've told them all about Tony and Tina's wedding, and they wonder, when are we going to see it? Well, it's not there.
Well, it's still running, not in New York, but
I think it's only running on special programming. I don't think it's set down anywhere right now.
Do you think the economics would allow it to come into New York? Now, it was done for a dime originally, Larry, but the economics now in theater is so extra. I think we were charging $45 for a ticket, right?
45.
I think now you have to give your firstborn as collateral to get a ticket.
Joe, I think you had the most expensive ticket at $100 a ticket because it included dinner. At one point, it went up. And people were shocked that off-Broadway had a $100 ticket.
Who cooked it? The food was good, wasn't it? The pasta was always good, and they had a nice
restaurant, yeah. Let's please try to remember that it was probably 1988 that I met you.
It's 38 years ago.
Right.
And you were 7 at the time.
I mean, listen, I was maybe one of the older people in the group.
No, I was older than everybody. I was in my 50s then.
Yeah, but
we were youthful 50.
Some of us were in our mid-30s, because that was me. And then there were a couple of others who were older.
Did you consider Tony and Tina site-specific? I didn't. Annie Hamburger was doing things then. Remember, she did Orestes down on the pier, and she did something like Stonewall down on another pier. It wasn't taking a piece and finding something that they recreated a real experience, and they made it funny. The humor was that we recognized ourselves in with those terrible families fighting each other.
But you did have to cast from within that city that you were traveling in so that the actors
knew the territory, didn't they?
And knew the nuance.
What cities did you do it in, Larry? Well, I knew about Chicago.
Philadelphia, Chicago, Kansas City.
Could you find enough talented people in a place like Kansas City that could cover it?
Yeah. I mean, you had to deal with, Ma, get up off the ground. And say, okay, let's just pull that back a little bit, okay? But then they would say, come on, you got to come out to meet an Italian wedding out here because you got to see just how they are. So, I would go with it, but I always worked with, the first thing I did was work with the community to understand who the community was. And then I followed the community in terms of building character because I was not interested in bringing New York to Kansas City. I was interested in bringing the idea and then letting Kansas City Italians all cut their grass in the same exact way. And it was so precise. It was unbelievable. It's done in colleges a lot because it has a large cast.
Mm.
But, we'd be surprised at where it goes and who wants to do it. I did it in Bermuda. So one family was black, one family was white.
Do you remember the spin-offs? I went to somebody's funeral.
Grandma Sylvia's.
It didn't have the indigenous humor. Well, a funeral that, for starters, doesn't pick you up.
Well, I went to the funeral because I had lots of friends in it. So,
but no food. Who goes to a funeral without food?
They didn't have
That's
food.
the other reason to go to a funeral, but eating
Right.
They came to me and I turned them down because I felt it would be slighting Tony and Tina. Part of Tony and Tina's success is, and I mean, there were a lot of people involved, but Nancy and Mark were very, very special in that.
They were.
I mean, it was classic performances and they gave it all.
Necessary.
And you helped.
And it was, thank you. And it was necessary to keep that level with everyone who was there. And that was not easy to do.
But I think their performance picked everybody up, didn't it?
As long as you had a good Tony and a good Tina, if you had a good Father Mark, if you had a good Vinnie Black, a good Donnie singer, you could get through the show. Because not that the other people weren't important, but that's really who people focused on. David, we didn't think a lot about the press. Not that we didn't think that it was important because we knew it was, but we just did our show. We just tried to do the show and fought to keep it as authentic as possible. There was one main thing that even everybody else here has heard. It's like, there are no bits, okay? But yet there were bits. But we wanted to push for what was real and what was strong and what was funny. We wanted to be funny, but funny based on reality. And it's kind of the difference between that and some of the other ripoffs.
People came back a second and third time bringing other people. That was very important. And what I found is that the first time you come, you're really focused on Tony and Tina. But then if you've seen it a few times, you find little little dramas going on that are equally amusing. It's almost like having you're seeing a new play because you're seeing different characters.
Well, you always got the good seats. Okay. So
I
then you
stood
were
most of the time, Larry.
right in the good area.
Yeah.
But so you watch Tony and Tina, but the people that had Connie and Barry at their table are going to walk away with stories about Connie and Barry. Or Father Mark getting drunk at their table. They're going to come away talking about him.
It was interesting. Joe and I were talking about the people that, I don't know who you interviewed, but he called me a couple of times because he was interviewing people who he thought he wanted my opinion if they could get press. And there shall be a unnamed Olympic diver.
He was definitely a Joey. But I said to him, "Oh, you would be great as Joey." And he goes,
"No, he just
came to audition for Tony."
Tony, yes. Well, he saw himself as a star. He never had a career in the theater.
And then Brooke Shield came. We had a lot of people. Brooke Shield came.
She auditioned? She came to talk about doing it?
She came to talk about doing it. So I said to her, I said, everybody's going to call you Brooke. So you got to be prepared to fight that all night. So everybody's going to want something about you because, you're this close to them. I said, I want you to sit with me by the bride's table. She said, I can't do that. They'll all come up to me instead of the bride. And she was right. So we moved the table.
Yeah, she couldn't do it because people would deal with her.
She said, I can't do it because she said people just won't leave me alone. She said they won't give me the ability to perform.
I,
Isn't that
I
a pro- that-
understand like monetarily why that would make a lot of sense, like to promote the show and stuff, but it really doesn't work for with the story that anybody who's trying to tell that story is trying to
No,
tell,
it
because
doesn't work.
it should be everybody. It should be an everyday girl is Tina and an everyday
Well,
guy
it-
is Tony and so on.
It did work with Lee Mazzilli because while people knew his name, they didn't know his face.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
He was an
Right.
athlete. And certainly Tony Miola, nobody knew well, I didn't know he was Olympic goalie, but public didn't know.
That was trying to pump energy and life back
Yeah.
into the show. And that was something sometimes, you need that. So
Yeah.
I must tell you that I was offended that I was never asked to audition for Tony.
Oh,
we're waiting for the next company.
All right. What's the name of the guy? Sue's friend.
Jay, Uncle Louie.
Uncle Louie. I could have done Uncle Louie.
You're so far better than that.
I have to tell you about my new career, Larry.
It's a spin-off. It'll be a spin-off, and it's just all
I have
about
to tell you what
Uncle
I
Louie.
am preparing now, and I'm
What is
serious.
that?
I'm going to do stand-up.
Are you really?
Yep.
That's great.
And my opening line is what the world's been waiting for is a 92-year-old stand-up comic. And the operative word here is standing up.
Where are you going to begin? I'm going to
Well,
come.
I've been booked when I want to do it at, there's something that's opened in the Catskill called the Borscht Belt Comedy Museum. And once a month they have comics come.
Wow.
And my friend Andy Jacobs, when I was telling him about it, he said, we have the museum. I said, yeah. And he said, I'm booking you. And I said, well, I have a vote on this. And I've been working on the act, and I'm going to,
Good.
92-year-old
Just
stand-up
steal.
comic. Well, Marilyn May still performs at 54 Below, and she's 95. So I thought it'd be a good opener, a kid opening the act.
done.
Brilliant.
Perfect.
Exciting.
All right, I'm not going to lose this opportunity. I've published 2 books since I retired. This is my memoir. That's me back in the day.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
It's called Fortune in My Eyes.
What a
Yes.
fabulous picture.
That's me at Fortune Society.
Yeah.
And then
please.
during the pandemic, I wrote all these stories, and that's the book. And the picture on the back is me just last year.
Oh, yes.
Did you begin life in Manhattan, or did you come to Manhattan?
I came to Manhattan. When I was
From?
4, my parents brought me into the city, and I looked around and said, thank God there's something else.
They
I
brought
was-
you from the island.
From New Jersey.
From
Ah.
Jersey.
Thank
And
God. So you stayed at 4.
The first thing I said about New York, I said, they don't have hedges or lawns. That's nice. The big love affair of my life has been this city. I love New York. I still do. I have a lot of pain from it, but I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's so great to see you because, of course, I've seen you a couple of times since then, but you were such a part of that, not creating Tony and Tina, but creating the history around it and creating the ability for it to have a life that went beyond, because I think that you saw in Tony and Tina what we all saw, which was
I
It's
saw it. It was also,
real.
but I think that for me as a PR person at that time, the fact that it was so much fun to work on was the great motivation. My last show, but when I retired, was working with Lauren Bacall. If I wasn't going to retire, that would have forced me to retire.
Was she difficult? Was it applause? No.
That was Waiting in the Wings
Wait.
with Rosemary Harris was the co-star, who was a dream. But Betty Persky, aka Lauren Bacall, was not. I had worked with divas all my life and never had trouble. I worked with Elizabeth Taylor and Betty Davis and Peggy Lee and Eartha Kitt and all high-powered women who had at one point were called difficult. Not for me. They were professionals. Betty Davis, you hear all the rumors about her. She was a pro. And she said to me once, I'm the one that's out there. I need professionals around me. And this was on Iguana, and I was just a kid then. And after the first interview that I did with her, she said, here's the rules. If you come to me and the interviewer doesn't insult my intelligence, or if it sells tickets and it works in my schedule, do it. You'll let me know. And after doing that a few weeks with her, she said to me, David, when you want something, you decide, I'll be there. And what she was telling me is she accepted me as I had passed muster. She wanted professionals, and we got along. I was thrilled to be working with her because I thought she was an enormous talent. And I found out that she was not that tough lady that everybody said. She was a professional who was out there.
David, thank you.
It was
Thank
so
you.
nice meeting you.
Yes,
for
what a
everything
pleasure.
you did for Tony and Tina and for the world at large.
Say hello to everybody when they come on. Tell them, David.
Yeah, not
I
going
I
to.
feel privileged to have been a part of this journey. A
Of
small
course.
part, but it was wonderful to be a part of it. Bye, everybody. All right. Well, I want you to know I only renew magazine subscriptions for 1 year.
I never buy bananas that are too dark because I'm afraid they'll be gone.
Tony and Tina's Wedding, Creating a Theater Tribe is a production of Virtual Arts. If you like this episode, please make sure to like, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And join us over on Instagram to see photos and archival materials related to the episodes. Join us next time for a conversation with a couple of Nunzios, Original Johnny, Eli Ganias, and Grandma Nunzio, Denise Moses.